The most forefront aspect of many cultures is the beverages and foods which they've consumed out of necessity. Most commonly, however, we eat beverages to go alongside these foods. And because water was so difficult to purify in any form that you would typically have within ancient times, all the way up until almost the 1700s, you would have to go and create alcohol, or at some point tea. But alcohol was the most common throughout history. Now, brewers and distillers would both make these alcohol and spirits, mainly out of necessity, as I've aforementioned. But the important part is that it's still practiced up until this day by brewers and distillers as more of an artistic form and a way of paying customers pay a large quantity of money for something that they may consider worth it. Now, I had the fortune of interviewing one such person, which was both a brewer and a distiller, but mainly just a brewer. He goes by the name of Mr. Aaron Lubert, and he works for Sleepy Eye Brewing Company over in the local town of Sleepy Eye. I interviewed him at 5 p.m. on March 10th, which was a Tuesday, and had about a 45-minute to 50-minute interview with him. Now, I think this is great, and I really enjoyed it, mainly because I'm going into fermentation science, which deals with both cheese making, bread making, and fermenting of different kinds of spirits and alcohols with yeast, and that's a variety of different alcohols. And this was an exciting interview for me because I get to have a little bit of insight into my career path. Now, my interviewee, Mr. Lubert, has two jobs, actually. He works for Christensen Farms, which is a local farming company in LLC, and also brews. But I asked him firstly why he decided to pursue this career, in a sense, or other job. He had said that for a long time he'd actually been doing home brewing and was referred to the company by a friend who knew the owners, and he had the fortune of then becoming a brewer for them. And then at this point, he also continued to work at Christensen Farms for a double income. He had no formal experience or training nor education, but he had recommended that I continue on my path of working towards a specialization in fermentation science through food science. He homebrewed for about 3 years prior, so he had a lot of experience creating different kinds of strains and all the different varieties of beer that you may see on the shelves they have over there at Sleepy Eye Brewing Company. Now, secondly, I had discussed a variety of questions with him about his communication. Most of his shifts, which he does about twice a week, typically don't have a lot of communication between many people. It's typically just him by himself, and he's putting the mash or roughly ground grains and creating that into alcohol. But he does frequently team up with the number of different co-brewers and co-owners that he may work with to create new strains, to order new products that he might need, to create the product and different kinds of beer that he does have. So communication is in fact very important outside of his normal shifts. Thirdly and lastly, we discussed his job duties and a few different questions. The biggest thing that he did say is that he spends about 6 to 6.5 hours every single time he brews, which is about twice a week, and he does this to create different brews that he needs, mainly from discussion outside of it, and he will communicate with his bosses, like, what quantity do you want, what quantity of this brew do you want, and so on. It mainly involves, and I'll give a short synopsis of how brewing works, is that you'll grind up grain, roughly ground, and then you'll put it inside, you'll boil it up, and this will release starch, which starch is kind of a simplified form of sugar. It's not exactly sugar like glucose, but it is much more simplified, and it's able, where you add yeast, and it'll feed on this starch. By feeding on this starch, it will then produce carbon dioxide, creating alcohol. And because of this, you can have a variety of different grains which you can use, all the way from oat to barley and so on. And it makes it a very versatile way of brewing, because you can brew with practically anything that has starches or glucose with it. Furthermore, he has two different sides per se, which is really just tasks or kinds of tasks which you have. Known as the hot side, which is the actual brewing, which he spends most of his time during his shifts doing. And then he has the cold side, which is really just storage or dry hopping, which is another way of flavoring it after it's already been brewed. He spends the majority of his time, however, on the hot side per se. Now, he does also have the task of making different flavorings or brewings or perfecting them, which is a very hard trial and error process. Now, this was all a short synopsis of the interview, but it was very wonderful to be able to go and share this information with you. Now, like I said, it was a wonderful experience, and I can very clearly see my career path, at least at this point, for becoming a brewer, not necessarily a distiller, because he only brews for the most part, but I was very glad to be able to see this very clear career path. And although I have very good communication skills at this point in time, at least for what he said might be needed for the job. I do need to pursue my academics further to get a leg up on most other people who may be trying to pursue a similar career or job. Now, while it may be dull by some people's standards, I do believe that I only was really enticed more by this idea of becoming a brewer distiller. And thank you.